All right, get ready, because today we're tackling a question that's been bugging fans for ages. Are The Simpsons actually psychic?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
Simpsons did it again, pops up every time something crazy happens in the news. But is it really prediction or just good satire? You sent me this article from Collider.com. The Simpsons predictions can actually be explained,
Yeah.
and it's making me rethink things.
It is funny how The Simpsons are like the go-to "I told you so" for the whole world.
Yeah.
But that article, it brings up this idea of, like, a Simpsons razor.
Simpsons razor. Huh. Okay, you got me curious. What's that all about?
Okay, so think about Occam's razor,
Hmm.
right? The simplest answer is usually right. Well, Simpsons razor says, no, it's the dumbest outcome that's most likely.
Oh,
It's
interesting.
not that the writers see the future. It's more like they get how our society just gravitates towards the absurd.
So less predicting, more like they're holding up this funhouse mirror to us, and sometimes it lines up with what actually happens.
Exactly. Like that warped reflection just sometimes turns out to be real life. And the article points out politicians especially, they fall into these patterns that The Simpsons just nails satirically.
Oh, yeah. I mean, Mayor Quimby blaming immigrants for taxes in that Much Apu About Nothing episode. That was what, 96? But it feels like we've been living that same story ever since.
Right. And that's the point. It's not one event they predicted, it's this tactic, scapegoating, fear-mongering. Politicians have been doing that forever, so The Simpsons can't predict it because it just keeps happening.
Okay, so maybe politicians are kind of predictable, but what about the tech stuff? The smartwatches in Lisa's wedding, video calls, heck, even that Eat Up Martha autocorrect thing. Did they really see all of that coming back in the 90s?
Those are the ones that get everyone going, right? But if you really look, The Simpsons were riffing on things that already existed, not, like, conjuring them up.
Wait, are you telling me Lisa's smartwatch wasn't some stroke of genius?
Well, Get Smart had wrist communicators back in the 60s, and Back
Hmm.
to the Future showed us video calls before The Simpsons even did it. Good satirists. They borrow from pop culture. They play on anxieties we already have about technology.
So they're more like tapping into those what if fears that were already out there.
Exactly. And it gets even better with that whole Eat Up Martha autocorrect from Lisa on Ice. Remember that?
Oh, yeah. Dolph trying to write beat up Martin on that Apple Newton, and it goes totally haywire.
That's the one. People forget. Those Apple Newtons actually existed, and their handwriting recognition was notoriously bad. The Simpsons were making fun of a real tech fail, not predicting some future one.
Okay, so maybe we need to cool it on giving them credit for inventing gadgets. But what about the Shard? That London skyscraper? People say it's in the background of Lisa's wedding. That's got to be a prediction, right?
That one's a classic. It's this futuristic building just popping up in an episode from like 95. But the article, it takes a more like skeptical view.
Oh, really? Tell me more.
First off, how much it really looks like the Shard is debatable. It could just be a random pointy thing the animators drew or, just artistic license.
So maybe it's more that fans want it to be a prediction, so they see it that way.
Could be. But here's the thing. Even if it was unintentional, it shows how The Simpsons make us look at the world differently.
Hmm.
You know, maybe it's less about finding exact predictions
Mm.
and more about how they make us question things, see connections we wouldn't have before.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that. Less about being right, more about getting us to think. Which, when you think about it, that's a much stronger kind of satire.
Totally. Speaking of satire, there's this other Simpsons prediction that gets thrown around. The Russian woman outraged by Michelangelo's David statue. Ring a bell?
Kind of. Remind me which episode that was.
It wasn't one specific event,
Hmm.
but it's that whole idea of censorship and outrage, like in Itchy and Scratchy and Marge, right?
Oh, right, where Marge is campaigning to get Itchy and Scratchy censored for being too violent.
Yeah. That one. The article's point is, it wasn't predicting that exact incident. It was satirizing this thing humans do, getting all puritanical and offended by art.
So it's not predicting the future, it's recognizing something about people that just keeps happening no matter what time period.
You got it. And that's why The Simpsons still feels so relevant, even decades later. They get at something fundamental about us. We get offended easily, overreact, want to censor anything that challenges us.
I'm starting to see a thing here. It's not about seeing specific events in the future. It's about recognizing these patterns of human behavior and then, like, blowing them up for comedic effect. But what about the big one? The one that made everyone think, okay, the Simpsons are time travelers. I'm talking, of course, about the Trump presidency.
Ah, yes, the episode that spawned 1,000 conspiracy theories, Part to the Future, from way back in 2000. Lisa becomes president after inheriting a budget mess from President Trump.
It's almost creepy how they seem to know right down to the financial troubles. Did the writers have a crystal ball or something?
This one, it actually does have a real-world link that makes it even weirder. The article mentions the writers were actually referencing Trump's little flirtation with running for president back in, like, '99. He had that exploratory committee, was talking about politics openly.
So it wasn't out of nowhere. They were riffing on his actual behavior, his whole love of attention and power, even back then.
Exactly. That's what makes it so interesting. Not mystical foresight, but they saw these traits in Trump that even then hinted at him maybe wanting the presidency someday.
Okay, so they weren't just pulling names out of a hat. They saw something in him. But hold on. If they were so good, why not warn us about the really bad stuff? You know, the January 6th thing, for example.
That's the question people forget when they're busy calling the Simpsons prophets. If they knew the future, wouldn't they have given us a heads up about, the stuff that really shook the country?
It does make you think, are there limits to this supposed power they have? Or maybe, like you said, it's not about specific events, but these bigger trends, these undercurrents that sometimes explode in ways we don't expect.
I think you're onto something there. And speaking of unexpected, there's this prediction going around about Kamala Harris, too. Apparently, people are saying Bart to the Future predicted her being in politics because Lisa wears a similar outfit in the episode.
Really? I haven't heard that one.
It's out there, but the article debunks it pretty quick. Women in politics, they often wear those kind of suits. Hillary Clinton, for example. It's us wanting to see patterns even when they're not really there.
So back to us wanting to believe in the Simpsons' powers, even if the evidence is, well, kind of weak. It's like we're so desperate to find meaning in all the chaos that we'll cling to anything, even a cartoon coincidence.
I think there's something deeper going on there. We want certainty in an uncertain world, and the idea that the Simpsons somehow knew it all, it's oddly comforting, right? Like someone somewhere gets it.
Yeah, makes sense. It's like we want to believe someone's in on the cosmic joke, even if it's just some writers in Hollywood.
Exactly. And that brings us to another prediction that seemed impossible. Then, bam, it happened. Disney buying 20th Century Fox. The Simpsons joked about it back in '98, then boom, 20 years later, it's real life.
I remember thinking that episode was just pure silliness, then reality, like, caught up with the joke. Was that a real prediction or them just seeing where things were headed?
Great question. And it gets at what makes The Simpsons so fascinating to analyze, as satire, as social commentary. They're like plugged into the zeitgeist, they get what's shaping the world, and then they blow it up in this hilarious but also insightful way.
So not necessarily predicting specific things, but understanding the trends that make those things more likely. Like with Disney Fox, they were seeing this corporate consolidation, this drive towards giant media empires.
Exactly. It's like they were holding up a magnifying glass to something already happening and say, hey, look where this could go. Look what happens when we let this stuff run wild.
Which, in a way, is smarter than just guessing random events, right? It means they understand the systems, the structures that are running the world behind the scenes.
I agree. And it's not just media either. The Simpsons have been satirizing everything. Political corruption, environmental stuff, consumerism run amok, you name it.
Like they're saying, hey, look at all this crazy stuff happening. You believe this is what we're doing. And the scary part is, most of the time, the answer is yes.
Right. And that's the power of satire, right? Make you laugh, but it can also make you squirm a bit. Exposes our hypocrisy, makes us question what we think, confront how ridiculous we're all being sometimes.
So if we're seeing a pattern, it seems like a lot of these Simpsons predictions come down to a few things. Exaggerating for laughs, understanding how culture works, and knowing those human behaviors that never really change.
I think you've nailed it. It's that mix of sharp wit, keen observation, and just knowing people deep down.
And maybe a pinch of pure luck sprinkled in there too. But there's this question that keeps bugging me, and the article kind of touches on it too. If the writers are so good at seeing these trends, should we be worried about the future they're showing us?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
On one hand, The Simpsons has always had this dark sense of humor about society. They show our worst instincts, greed, stupidity, how we self-sabotage.
It's like they're saying, look at all the ways we could screw up. Aren't we clever? And the scary part is, they're often right.
Right. But here's the thing. I think there's a little bit of hope in all that satire, too. Maybe, just maybe, by laughing at ourselves, admitting our flaws, we can start to change them.
You're saying humor can actually lead to change. That by shining a light on how ridiculous we are, we can see ourselves better and, like, course correct.
Exactly. I think that's one of the most powerful things satire can do. It's not about yelling, "You're wrong." It's about holding up that mirror and saying, "Look at us. Look what we're doing. Can we do better?"
Like that Oscar Wilde quote, if you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you.
Exactly.
Mm.
Humor's a weapon, and The Simpsons have been masters of it for decades. Made us laugh, think, and question everything.
But here's another thought from the article. What if we hold the Simpsons accountable not just for what they get right, but also for what they get wrong?
Ooh, now that's interesting. I haven't thought about it like that before.
Like if they predicted we'd all have flying cars by now, shouldn't we be asking for our money back?
Ha ha. It's a funny way to point out that nobody can predict everything, of course. But it also makes you think, when artists are dealing with real-world stuff, what's their responsibility?
Do they have to be right, or is entertainment the main goal? Should they be warning us about danger or just reflecting the anxieties of the time they're in?
It's complicated, no easy answers, but it's worth thinking about as we keep exploring this whole psychic Simpsons thing.
Totally agree. And listeners, as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, keep that question in mind. Because next time, we're going beyond just predictions and looking at The Simpsons as a commentary on satire itself.
You know, reading this article really made me think about satire, like what it actually is.
Mm.
The Simpsons isn't just funny, it's using humor to get us to really think about the world, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, absolutely. And because they've been doing it for so long, like 3 decades plus, they've got this huge backlog of jokes that, looking back, can seem kind of freaky accurate.
Exactly. And that's what makes these so-called predictions so interesting. They make us ask, are they really seeing the future, or are they just like masters at spotting the absurd stuff that's already happening and then just making it bigger?
Like they're turned into this, I don't know, weirdness frequency that runs through society.
Okay, so let's test that theory. The article brings up a few more examples, like the Siegfried and Roy tiger attack. In '93, they had an episode with a white tiger attacking the duo during a Vegas show. Then in 2003, it happened to Roy Horn in real life. That one, it always gives me chills. I mean, it's pretty similar, you can't deny it.
Mm.
But the article wants us to think about the context, critically.
So, are we really supposed to believe they predicted that specific event, or is there a more like down-to-earth explanation?
Well, wild animals, they're unpredictable, right? Potentially dangerous. Everybody kind of knew working with tigers, especially on a live show, was risky, even before that episode.
So they were playing on that fear, that what if, thought that was already in people's minds.
Exactly. It's like writing a show about firefighters and then having a fire episode, not exactly groundbreaking.
Okay, so maybe the tiger attack wasn't real foresight, just playing on existing fears. What about the Lady Gaga Super Bowl thing? There's an episode from 2012 with her performing at the Super Bowl, then 5 years later, bam, it happens.
Ah, yes, the Lady Gaga prophecy. It's tempting to see it as a straight-up prediction, but I think it's more complicated than that.
Okay, give me the nuanced take. I'm ready.
By 2012, Lady Gaga was already like a huge star, known for these over-the-top shows and crazy costumes. She was perfect for the whole Super Bowl halftime spectacle.
So less about seeing the future, more about understanding how things were already going. Like they saw the trajectory she was on.
Precisely.
Yeah.
They were tapped into the culture of the moment and just kind of extended it forward. It's like saying, wow, The Simpsons predicted a famous musician would play at a big music event. Not exactly rocket science, right?
Right. It's about separating what's actually surprising from what's just kind of likely to happen anyway. Which brings us back to that Disney-Fox merger, the one that seemed crazy in '98 but became reality in 2019.
Yeah, that one. It's easy to look back and say, wow, they got it right. But I think it teaches us something about those big forces that shape the world.
Like, it's not about specific events, but understanding the trends that make those events more likely. Like with Disney-Fox, they were seeing this whole corporate consolidation thing, that drive towards mega media empires.
Exactly. It's like they were holding up a mirror to what was already happening, saying, hey, this is where we're headed. This is what happens when we let these things get out of control.
Which, in a way, is way more insightful than just guessing random events. It means they really get the systems, the structures that are driving the world behind the scenes.
Totally agree. And it's not just media, right? The Simpsons have been making fun of everything, politicians, the environment, how much we consume. The list goes on.
Like, hey, look at all this crazy stuff happening. Can you believe this is what we're doing to ourselves? And the scary thing is, most of the time, the answer's yes.
Exactly. And that's what good satire does, right? You laugh, but then you maybe feel a little uncomfortable too. It shows you your own hypocrisy, makes you question your assumptions, makes you face just how absurd things have gotten.
So, if we're seeing a pattern here, it seems like these Simpsons predictions really boil down to a few things: exaggerating for laughs, understanding culture, and knowing those human behaviors that never really change.
I think you've got it. It's that combination of being witty, observant, and just, like, understanding what makes people tick.
And maybe a little sprinkle of just plain luck on top of it all. But there's a question that I keep coming back to, and the article kind of hints at it too. If the Simpsons writers are so good at seeing these trends, should we be worried about the future they're showing us?
Ooh, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Right.
On the one hand, they've always had this kind of dark humor about society. They focus on our worst habits, greed, stupidity, how we seem to want to mess things up for ourselves.
It's like they're saying, look at all the ways we could screw this up. Aren't we clever? And the scary part is, a lot of the time, they're right.
Yeah, but here's the thing. I think there's a little bit of hope mixed in with all that darkness. Maybe, just maybe, by laughing at ourselves, by admitting our flaws, we can actually start to change.
So you're saying humor can be a way to make things better. That by seeing how ridiculous we're being, we can kind of wake up and change course.
Exactly. I think that's one of the best things satire can do. It's not about shouting, "You're wrong." It's about holding up that mirror and saying, "Look at us. Look at what we're doing. We can do better than this."
It's like that Oscar Wilde quote: if you want to tell people the truth, make them laugh, otherwise they'll kill you.
Exactly. Humor can be a powerful weapon, and The Simpsons have been using it expertly for decades. They make us laugh, they make us think, and they make us question the world around us.
But the article also brings up something else. What if we judge The Simpsons not just on the predictions they get right, but also on the ones they get wrong?
Ooh, that's an interesting way to look at it. I never thought about it like that before.
Like if they told us we'd all be driving flying cars by now, shouldn't we be demanding a refund?
Uh-huh. It's a funny way to point out that no one can see the future perfectly. But it also raises a bigger question. When artists are talking about real-world issues, what are they responsible for?
Do they gotta get everything right, or is the main goal just to entertain us? Should they be warning us about what's coming, or just showing us the fears people had back then?
It's tough. There are no easy answers. Yeah. But it's definitely worth thinking about as we keep digging into this whole psychic Simpsons thing.
I'm with you on that one. And listeners, as we finish up this part of the deep dive, I want you to keep that question in mind. Because next time, we're going beyond specific predictions and exploring The Simpsons as a way of commenting on satire itself.
I think that'll be really interesting. The Simpsons has become such a cultural touchstone, it's almost like we take its satirical voice for granted.
Yeah, like we're so used to them poking fun at everything that we forget how clever and sometimes how insightful that poking can be.
Exactly. And, the fact that they've been doing this for so long, over 30 years, and they're still making us laugh, think, and squirm a little, that's got to tell us something about how effective their approach to satire really is.
Absolutely. So stay tuned, listeners, because in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to get meta and examine The Simpsons as a masterclass in satire itself.
All right, so we've gone through decades of Simpsons episodes, from politics to technology, and I gotta say, this whole deep dive has really changed how I see the show. It's not just about laughing anymore.
Right. It's like peeling back the layers, you start with the jokes, but underneath there's this whole critique of the world we live in.
It's like we've been getting a master class in satire without even knowing it. But as we wrap this up, I think we gotta zoom out a bit. What does it all mean, all these predictions, intentional or not, what's it saying about us?
Yeah, the article, it argues that The Simpsons is basically holding up this funhouse mirror to our own absurdity. Not predicting the future, but reflecting the present in this distorted way, making us laugh at ourselves.
And sometimes that distorted reflection ends up being more accurate than we'd like, right? But here's what gets me. The Simpsons has been around for like over 30 years, and the jokes still land today. It's crazy, right? You'd think they'd run out of stuff to make fun of, but the humor's still fresh, the satire's still sharp.
So what's their secret? Why do Simpsons jokes never seem to get old?
I think it's because they're tapping into something universal about being human.
Hmm.
Our flaws, our stupid stuff, our love of the absurd, those things haven't changed much over time.
So not just making fun of specific stuff or people, but finding those like eternal truths about us that are always going to be funny no matter the time period.
Exactly. That's why they're timeless. We all have those "did that really just happen" moments, those times when we got to laugh at the absurdity of it all.
And The Simpsons is right there with us saying, yep, that happened, and guess what? It's gonna happen again. Better get used to it.
Exactly. But I don't think it's all bad, you know? There's something kind of freeing about admitting how absurd life can be.
Like, laughing at it helps us deal with the chaos, gives us back some control when things get out of hand.
I think so. Humor can be a way to deal with tension, with tough emotions, to
Mm.
find some light even when things are dark. And The Simpsons has always been good at that, finding the funny even in the messed up parts of life.
So maybe their legacy isn't about predicting the future, but about helping us deal with now, with humor and a critical eye.
I like that. It's about seeing the crazy stuff, laughing at it, and maybe even learning from it.
Like they're saying, we're all stuck in this weird world together. Might as well have a laugh while we figure it out.
Totally. And who knows, maybe laughing at ourselves is the first step to actually changing things, right? Maybe that's the real power of The Simpsons, not seeing the future, but inspiring us to make a better one.
I love that. So, to wrap up our deep dive listeners, I want to leave you with this thought. Next time you're watching The Simpsons, don't just go for the laughs. Pay attention to what they're saying under the surface, the jokes about society, the stuff that makes you think. Because you might find the show is way more than just entertainment. It's a mirror to who we are, where we've been, and maybe even where we're headed. And who knows, maybe with some laughter and some honest self reflection, we can avoid those bad predictions and make a future that's a little less crazy and a little more, well, human. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive about